The storm began earlier than the forecast had predicted. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a bruised shade of gray, and the first low rumbles of thunder shook the air. I was driving home from a weekend at my cousin's farmhouse, a stretch of winding back roads surrounded by dense woods. The radio crackled with static, the weather report barely audible between bursts of interference. I didn't mind storms. In fact, I usually found them calming. But as the rain started to fall, heavy and insistent, something about this storm felt different. The darkness seemed to press closer, the trees on either side of the road swaying violently in the wind. My car's headlights barely cut through the downpour, and I had to slow to a crawl just to stay on the road. The first flash of lightning lit up the sky, illuminating the dense forest for a split second. In that brief moment, I thought I saw something on the side of the road. A figure, standing just at the edge of the trees. My breath caught, and I gripped the steering wheel tighter. When the light faded, the figure was gone. I told myself it was just my imagination. The rain, the flicker of light, the eerie atmosphere, it was enough to play tricks on anyone's mind. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. Another crack of thunder split the air, louder this time, and the rain intensified. My wipers were working overtime, but they could barely keep up. I squinted through the windshield, my knuckles white as I clutched the wheel. And then I saw it again. This time, I was sure. A man was standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding on the wet pavement. The figure didn't move. He was tall, his clothes dark and drenched, his face hidden beneath the brim of a wide hat. The car came to a stop just a few feet away, and for a moment neither of us moved. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I rolled down the window slightly, rain immediately splattering my arm. "Are you okay?" I called out, my voice shaking. The man didn't answer. He just stood there, unmoving, staring at me. Or at least I thought he was staring. I couldn't see his eyes beneath the shadow of his hat. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like the storm had sucked all the oxygen away. "Do you need help?" I tried again. My voice sounded too loud, unnatural against the roar of the rain. The man raised a hand slowly, pointing to the side of the road. I followed his gesture, squinting into the darkness. Lightning flashed again, and I saw what he was pointing at, a small dirt path leading into the woods. It was overgrown and muddy, barely visible beneath the tangled branches. "I don't understand," I stammered, but when I looked back at the road, the man was gone. My breath itched, and I whipped my head around, searching for any sign of him. The road was empty, the rain falling harder than ever. I leaned out of the window, water soaking my sleeve. "Hello?" I called, my voice barely carrying over the storm. Nothing. Just the sound of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. I felt a chill creep down my spine, colder than the rain against my skin. Shaking, I rolled the window up and locked the doors, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I debated turning around, driving back to my cousin's place. But something compelled me to keep going. Curiosity? Fear? I wasn't sure. All I knew was that I needed to get away from that dirt path and whoever had been standing on the road. The storm grew worse as I drove, the wind howling like a living thing. The road seemed endless, the trees on either side closing in. And then, without warning, my car's engine sputtered and died. The headlights dimmed, and the wipers stopped mid-swipe. I was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the occasional flicker of lightning. "No, no, no," I muttered, turning the key in the ignition. The engine groaned but refused to start. My hands trembled as I tried again. Nothing. I grabbed my phone, but of course, there was no signal. My heart sank as I stared at the screen, the battery draining faster than it should. Outside, the rain battered the car, and the wind shook the trees violently. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. A soft sound broke through the storm, so faint I almost didn't hear it. A tap. Then another. It was coming from the window. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate. Slowly, I turned my head toward the driver's side window. Lightning flashed, and I saw it. A hand, pale and skeletal, pressed against the glass. I screamed, scrambling to the passenger seat. The hand slid down the window, leaving a streak of water and something darker. Blood? My heart was racing, my chest heaving as I fumbled for the door handle. But where would I go? The woods were dark and endless, and something told me that whatever was out there was worse than staying in the car. The tapping stopped. For a moment there was silence. And then a voice. "Let me in." It was low, gravelly, and filled with something I couldn't name. Malice. Hunger. I shook my head violently, tears streaming down my face. "Go away," I screamed, my voice cracking. The voice came again, closer this time. "Let me in, Grace." My blood turned to ice. It knew my name. "How do you know my name?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. No answer. Just the sound of the wind and the rain. And then, the car rocked violently, as if something heavy had slammed into it. I screamed again, curling into a ball in the passenger seat. The windows rattled, and the car rocked again, harder this time. I didn't know how long I stayed like that, trembling and crying, waiting for the nightmare to end. Eventually, the rocking stopped. The rain began to lighten, the thunder fading into the distance. Slowly, I lifted my head, peeking out the window. The road was empty. The woods were still. It was as if nothing had happened. My car started on the first try. Relieved but wary, I pressed the gas pedal and drove forward, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. As I rounded the next bend, the trees thinned, revealing a small clearing ahead. There, parked on the side of the road, was another car. Its doors hung open, the interior dark and wet. I slowed down, peering out at the abandoned vehicle. Something was written on the fogged-up rear window, words scrawled in long, jagged strokes. "See you soon." My stomach dropped, and my foot slammed on the accelerator. But as I sped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. In the rearview mirror, just for a second, I thought I saw a figure standing in the clearing, watching me. It started with a text message. "Come quick. It's happening again." The sender's name, Jamie, flashed across my phone screen just as the first rumble of thunder rolled through the sky. Jamie was my best friend and someone I trusted completely. But the urgency in the text sent a shiver down my spine. The problem was, Jamie lived almost an hour away, deep in the woods, and the storm outside was getting worse by the second. "What's going on?" I texted back, but the message wasn't sent. No signal. I glanced out the window. The wind whipped through the trees, bending them at unnatural angles. Shadows seemed to ripple and shift across the lawn, distorted by the flickering streetlight. The air was thick, oppressive, as if the storm was more than just a natural event. For a split second, I thought I saw movement just beyond the tree line, a shape too large to be an animal. But when I blinked, it was gone. A second flash of lightning illuminated the sky, accompanied by a crack of thunder so loud it rattled the windows. My phone buzzed again. "Hurry!" The single word sent a cold prickle down my spine. Jamie wasn't prone to panic, and their cryptic messages were so unlike them that I felt a gnawing unease settle in my chest. Grabbing my keys and a flashlight, I headed to the car. The storm seemed to close in around me as I drove, the rain hammering against the windshield, and the wipers barely keeping up. The trees lining the road looked like shadowy figures, bending and swaying in the wind. Every crack of thunder felt like it was shaking the ground beneath me. As I turned onto the narrow dirt road leading to Jamie's cabin, a flash of lightning illuminated something in the distance. For just a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching me. My stomach tightened, but when the darkness returned, the figure was gone. I shook it off as paranoia. The storm was messing with my head. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Jamie's cabin came into view just as the rain began to ease. It sat at the edge of a clearing, small and unassuming, with smoke curling lazily from the chimney. But something was off. The front door was slightly ajar, swaying in the wind. The porch light flickered, casting eerie shadows on the ground. I parked the car and hesitated, gripping the flashlight tightly. "Jamie?" I called out as I stepped onto the porch. My voice sounded small against the roar of the storm. The cabin was silent. The only sound was the creak of the floorboards under my feet. Pushing the door open, I stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The living room was empty. The fire in the fireplace had burned low, casting flickering shadows across the walls. A mug of coffee sat on the table, still steaming. Jamie had been here recently. "Jamie?" I called again, louder this time. From somewhere deeper in the cabin came a faint sound. A whisper? A rustle? It was hard to tell over the storm. I moved cautiously down the hallway, my flashlight beam trembling slightly. The shadows seemed to stretch and shift as I walked, like they were alive. At the end of the hall, Jamie's bedroom door was open. Inside, the room was in disarray. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled and damp, as if someone had been thrashing in their sleep. The window was open, rain blowing in and soaking the floor. On the nightstand was Jamie's phone, its screen cracked and smeared with something dark. Blood? I felt a wave of nausea. "Jamie, where are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The whispering sound came again, this time louder. It was coming from outside. I turned and ran to the back door, which led to the woods behind the cabin. The door was wide open, the screen flapping in the wind. Shining my flashlight into the darkness, I could just make out a trail of muddy footprints leading into the trees. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay inside, I followed the trail. The forest was a nightmare, the storm's fury barely kept at bay by the dense canopy above. The flashlight's beam danced wildly as I stumbled over roots and through the mud, the whispering growing louder with every step. "Jamie," I shouted, my voice hoarse. A flash of lightning illuminated the path ahead, and for a brief moment, I saw them, Jamie, standing in the middle of a clearing, their back to me. Their clothes were soaked, their hair matted to their face. But something about the way they stood was wrong. Their head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and their arms hung limply at their sides. "Jamie!" I called again, rushing toward them. As I stepped into the clearing, Jamie turned slowly to face me. My breath caught in my throat. Their eyes were wide and unblinking, their pupils blown out. Their mouths moved, but the words didn't match the whispering I'd been hearing. It was as if they were speaking and something else was speaking through them at the same time. "It's here," Jamie said, their voice distorted, like a radio tuned to the wrong frequency. "It's watching us." Before I could respond, another flash of lightning lit up the clearing, and I saw it. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, its form impossibly tall and thin. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. It didn't move, but I felt its gaze pierce through me, freezing me in place. Jamie's hand shot out, grabbing my arm with a strength that didn't seem human. "Don't look at it," they hissed. "Don't let it see you." "What is it?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Jamie shook their heads, tears streaming down their faces. "Run!" The figure took a step forward, its movements slow and deliberate. The whispering grew louder, filling my head, drowning out my thoughts. I grabbed Jamie's arm and pulled, dragging them back toward the trail. We ran blindly through the woods, branches scratching at our faces and mud sucking at our shoes. The whispering followed us, relentless and deafening. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel the figure's presence, its gaze burning into the back of my skull. When we finally burst out of the trees and into the clearing around the cabin, Jamie collapsed, gasping for air. I turned to help them, but they pushed me away. "Go," they croaked. "Get out of here. It's what I want. I'm not leaving you," I snapped, grabbing their arm and pulling them toward the car. Jamie struggled weakly, but they were too exhausted to fight me off. We stumbled into the car, and I slammed the door just as the figure emerged from the tree line. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, its glowing eyes locked on us. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, the whispering stopped. Jamie's head snapped up, their eyes wild. Drive. I didn't need to be told twice. The tires spun in the mud before catching, and we shot down the driveway and onto the main road. The storm raged around us, but I didn't care. All I could think about was putting as much distance as possible between us and that thing. When we finally reached the safety of the highway, I risked a glance at Jamie. They were staring out the window, their faces pale and expressionless. "What happened back there?" I asked, my voice shaking. Jamie didn't answer. They just turned to me, their eyes empty, and whispered, "It's not over."